This meeting of the City of Apache Junction Public Arts Commission on Monday, July 12th at 5:33 p.m. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and we'll move on to the roll call.
Commissioner Klett?
Here.
Vice Chair Nicholas is on vacation this week. Chair Buys?
Here.
Commissioner Coe is also out of town. Commissioner Danford?
Here.
Commissioner Ham?
Present.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll move then to the approval of agenda, consideration of approval of today's agenda.
I move that the Public Art Commission accept the agenda as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Danforth. And roll call?
Chair Buys?
Yes.
Commissioner Danford?
Yes.
Commissioner Ham?
Yes.
Commissioner Klett?
Yes.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I believe the next item is the approval of the minutes from last month, the minutes of June 14th, 2021. Is there a motion for approval?
I move we approve the minutes from last month.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
And roll call?
Chair Buys?
Yes.
Commissioner Danford?
Yes.
Commissioner Ham?
Yes.
Commissioner Klett?
Yes.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on quickly this evening. I don't think we have any announcement of artwork or public hearings. So that'll take us into old business. Presentation and discussion on the following items with staff with Diane of Art Space 6.
Good evening. Looks like the first item is going over the work plan. Did everybody have a chance to take a look at that? It's up on your screen. There are very few changes. Larry went over and reconfigured these in a I think a more reasonable order. Does anybody have any questions about the work plan? I mean, I think, Jeff, you said before, get rid of the categories. It's a great idea. So I think now we're...
Yeah, if we're going to go chronological, it doesn't make sense to have the categories. Just
Yeah.
do everything, toss everything in there.
Yeah, I think this works better. So does anybody have any questions about this? No? No.
And so the intent for further development is to really turn it into an actionable process, right?
Yes.
So we'll be seeing kind of continued revisions.
Oh, yeah. I think every month there will probably be revisions. There are timelines and deadlines listed, but those are going to be fluid somewhat. Part of it depends on budget for new projects. But yeah, I think overall this is pretty much where we are right now. Yeah. Okay. The next item is creation of a request for qualifications for artist selection. And I mentioned before that May 8th in the workshop that there are two different kinds of requests. There's a request for proposals, which is generally frowned upon in the best practices for public art, because you're asking artists to invest a lot of time and money to create a proposal, and they have to do a lot of research to do so. So basically, the best practices, we do requests for qualifications, and that's what this guide is all about. So I'm just going to hit some of the highlights of this. Please feel free to ask me any questions about why this is considered best practices, or if you have any questions, just be sure to let me know. So this is basically about calls to artists. You know, after you've decided on a project, you have a budget that's established, then you start writing up that RFQ, which is request for qualifications. And there are a number of elements that you see on pretty much every single call for artist. So we work with procurement departments for the most part, because you have to follow a certain legal procedure. For instance, if the deadline is 11:59 p.m. on August 1st and something comes in a minute later, technically that submittal cannot be considered. So procurement departments are usually very, very emphatic about what type of timeline you establish and making sure people have enough information ahead of time so that they're not calling at the last minute and saying, I need to get this in, and I need this piece of information and so forth. So call elements, definitions, and descriptions. You have a brief description of a project, and as kind of an example, we can talk a little bit about dog park. So you would have a short description of what the dog park project would be, what you would like the project, the artwork to do. So that's basically what that is. Project description, you talk about what the artist is going to be responsible for. If an artist is responsible for everything, including the installation, pulling permits, having stamped drawings by an engineer, all that is going to be laid out in the call to artists. So the idea is that an artist can look at a glance at all the different elements of the call and say, I think I'm a good fit for that project, I have time for that project, I meet the eligibility requirements. And I mean, there are artists who now only respond to requests for qualifications in the $300,000 up bracket because they've made it. They have enough major projects under their belt that they can say, yes, I'm an experienced public artist, I've worked with large budgets, I am on time, I've got a great, list of references. But a lot of times you have emerging artists and they're just starting out in the field. So everything has to be listed specifically. And, if you have a large budget project, you're naturally going to have, 100 or more people apply for that. If you've got a low budget project, like 50,000, you're still going to get a good number of submittals. Chances are they'll be local or regional. So also you're going to describe if it's integrated art. So if you have a bridge that's under design and you want to bring an artist into that design team, then you're going to have certain artistic elements that are going to be integrated into that bridge. So that's integrated art. Functional, benches is just one example of that. If you want an artist to work on the master plan, if the city is undergoing an entire master plan for like planning and zoning, you may want an artist to be part of that. And also existing art. There may be projects that really call out for just artwork that's already been completed. So here, arts goals and criteria, you want to say, something that's going to appeal to dog owners. That'll be one of the criteria, one of the goals, and so forth. It could be very specific or it could be very general. You're going to probably include a site plan and list where the locations are, where the dog park is located, what areas are being considered for public art. So that's the site or art location plan. Budget, again, you're going to outline exactly what the artist is responsible for. If the artist is going to be flying out from Albuquerque, that artist has to make sure that he or she has a budget to be doing that. And then it lists all the other costs that are not always considered by artists. Artist eligibility, you might want to put in there, age 21 and above. You might want to put in they've completed a project in the amount of $100,000 or above. You may want to say that we're looking at an artist who's regional, covering the western states. So those are all different types of eligibility requirements that you're going to put in the call to artists. Again, an artist can look at that and say, I qualify or I don't qualify.
For the quick question.
Sure.
If it's all right. For the budget, in terms of the RFQ, when you're putting that together, do you typically go into that level of detail as to what those amounts are in terms of, for example, your example of travel allowances, or is that something that is hashed out prior to just final acceptance? Is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually an artist, you don't specify it right when you issue the request for qualifications.
Right.
And an artist will respond, this is what I've done. And if an artist is a finalist, maybe you have 3 artists and you want to go to the trouble of having them create a proposal, given a fee of maybe $1,000 or whatever, then they can list specifically what their budget's going to be. But most of the time, an artist is selected, and then part of the first payment to the artist, then he or she has to supply a budget.
Right.
These are the materials I'm using. I've got a quote from fabricators. This is what it's going to cost me to do this. Because you don't want to go too far down the line and promise something to the public and then find out, whoa, he can't afford to do that. And that has happened.
And so for the RFQ development, it sounds like what the idea here would be just to kind of provide an outline, just to help the artists consider what needs they may
Exactly.
need to include in their budget.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And if it's an experienced public artist, he or she's already going to know that
Right.
I need insurance, I need permits, I need, to consult with an engineer. They're going to know that. So, but it's good to outline it in the call for artists, just so that they can start thinking about if it's worth it to them to do it. Application requirements, I'm not going to get too technical here, but in my experience, if somebody's submitting their qualifications and there is a set of requirements for submitting your images, usually you have you submit 10 images of past work. You try to submit images that might be really interesting to the artist selection panel, and it shows your best work and or work that might be appropriate for that site. But you have to submit it in a certain way. You have to have the, putting it in a PowerPoint, and then you have to have an annotation that accompanies that and says, this is the project, this was the budget of the project, this is when it was finished, this is the location. So you get a good idea of, everything about that particular project. Now you have 10 slides. I've seen artists try and put 6 images on a slide. That's really a bad idea. They're trying to cheat, basically. And that really detracts. I mean, we've gone back to artists afterwards and say, you really don't want to do that. It really dilutes your submittal. But there will be times when you'll have one overall image of a project and then maybe another slide or image of a detail of that project that shows the craftsmanship or whatever. So.
And sorry to interrupt again. I'm just curious, in terms of kind of trying to direct the artist on what to submit, is there a recommendation on if it's advantageous to specify? I mean, I guess you can frame it in a way where it's clear to the artist that what would be beneficial would be review projects of size and scale similar to what's in the RFQ, right?
Exactly.
But it wouldn't limit them from showing that their
Right.
abilities
Right.
may have some larger, or
And-
bigger, may have some larger projects under their belt too.
Absolutely, and a great example is if you've gone to Sky Harbor Airport and you've seen these terrazzo floors, a lot of them are by artists who are not that experienced, and it gives two-dimensional artists a real chance to show what they can do in the realm of public art. So, and that in turn, we've selected artists who've only done projects that are 2D. But since they did a project at Sky Harbor, they know public art and they do great images. So we don't exclude that artist just because he or she hasn't done a 3D sculpture. So you're looking at the quality of the work and you're thinking in the back of your mind, how is that going to translate for this particular project?
Great.
Usually they're done online. The submittals are usually done online. It's just easier and it's cleaner. And also, it's another thing is, artists used to submit everything in a packet and it had to arrive at a certain time at a certain date. And then the city staff has to go through all the packets and then put everything into a PowerPoint and so forth. Pretty much everything is done not through the mail at this point. Usually it's done where if you ask for something to be in a PowerPoint, the artist should be able to create a PowerPoint.
And Sydney, do you know, I'm assuming that the city already has means for receiving RFQs from other departments, right? Is it
Usually we receive them by email.
by email?
Mhm.
Okay. And so does that have any limitations in terms of where you're getting a portfolio or a presentation, and have y'all run into issues with there being like file size limitations?
I'm not aware of it. Barb, do you know where size maximums for receiving? I know there's an internal that's different.
Yeah, we have a 10 megabyte maximum.
Okay.
So, but I'm sure if this comes up and size of it is an issue, we could work with IT and they can figure out a workaround.
Okay, sure.
And a lot of artists use Dropbox and other types of
R-
files
yeah.
too.
Yeah, I mean, I just know I've, working in the graphic industry, submitted pretty large files before via email, and it ends up being more work to track down what got bounced back than having it set up in the first place.
And yeah, an experienced public artist is going to know that they have large files. They're, you know, if you got engineering drawings or whatever, they have to have those programs that are going to accommodate receiving and sending large files. Okay, and then the last, you know, talking about deadline, we've already done that. And then the artist selection panelists. This particular handout says usually there are 3 finalists and no more than 5. I've actually seen city projects where they've had 9 panelists, and it's a lot of wrangling. It is a lot of wrangling. It was it was for an airport, and they were selecting several artists, and there was, you know, several $1 million involved. And the person who was in charge of putting together a selection panel thought 9 would be a good number, had museum curators, museum directors. I mean, they brought in people from, this was in Sacramento, they brought in people from Oakland, they brought in people from San Francisco, and I don't know that that's needed. And I mean, this is, I mean, unless you're doing some, you know, a mega project, I don't think that's even worth thinking about. So I don't know that 3 finalists is enough, but 5 finalists, you always want an odd number. 5 finalists is really a good size for a panel. And then it allows you to have, you know, outside people, community stakeholders, arts professionals, and whatever, to join members of the Art Commission. Okay. And then we've got another handout dedicated to, well, this is an actual, I mean, you can just peruse this as you want. This is just a good example of a call for artists that includes all those elements. It includes a preliminary schedule, eligibility. It's very short on eligibility requirements, budget. It goes into some things normally we look at in a contract, you know, talking about W-9. Well, an artist should be able to have a W-9. I don't know that you need to specify it in a call for artist. It goes through the selection criteria, how to apply, what the artist is responsible for, and then there's an actual application that is accompanied with that. So this is just a good reference point as the city of Apache Junction starts working on call for artists. This is just an example. Okay, and the last one is selecting artist selection panel members. You know, again, cities do it differently. There's no particular set number that you have to have. 5, like I said already, is a good number. Some places do have 7. But this just gives you how people are appointed to a selection committee. It mentions that it has to be a group where there's give and take. People have to be able to speak their piece. They have to be able to speak their mind. So when you think that there are actually cities that talk about keeping in mind the personalities of the people that you put on the selection panel, just to make sure that, you know, everybody feels like their voice is going to be heard. Often there's an ethics or conflict of interest statement that's given to every member of an artist selection panel. And basically it says that you do not stand to gain in any way from being on this panel. You do not know, or you can know someone, but you're not related to somebody who is up for this, who submitted their requirements. You know, basically you have to disclose anything that might be considered or perceived as unethical. And so those are traditionally handed out at the beginning of a selection panel meeting. And I think you can probably just read this over yourself. It talks about selection panel responsibilities. I gave an example of what the Metropolitan Transit Authority for New York City does. They don't really have community involvement, which I find very surprising. They basically will have an artist who's completed a previous project for the subway sit on a panel, which is good. But they have a different way of running their panels, and I also give some descriptions. So any questions about that?
So, I mean, specifically, we'll need to address creating this, the makeup of the selection panel for the dog park, right? Is that something that is open for discussion at this point, or, I guess,
Yeah, it's on the agenda. It's something you can talk about.
We can certainly talk about the dog park panel, sure.
so, Joel, I know that Diana's mentioned conflict of interest. I'm assuming that the panels, or when subcommittees or panels are formed in other commissions, that they usually get a similar presentation that we got about conflict of interest? Okay. So that should be very well covered then. And then, since I think when we spoke last month, we discussed the selection of, well, Dan, you mentioned a 5-member panel is really kind of strikes a middle ground, especially for a project that's probably within the realm that we're looking at for the dog park. And that would be comprised of members of this commission, select members of the commission, select members of the public, or representatives of either Apache Junction or other professionals, right? And then since it's a Parks Department project, would there be representatives from the Parks Department?
I think that's a great question. I know that when the city of Phoenix has a project that is involving funds from the water department, like they're working on a lot of well site redevelopment projects right now. There are these awkward corners of land that have just been devoted to this giant well. They're redoing several of those. So when they have water department money, they have somebody from the water department sit on the artist selection panel. And they usually don't know a lot about art, and they rely on the other members of the panel. But because it's their funding, they want to have a say in who's selected. So for this particular project, I believe there's money being contributed by the Parks Department. So that would be something to consider, either somebody who's on the board or somebody who's actually a member of the staff, either or.
All right. And because this is a public, because it's from the Parks Department, I mean, typically the funding mechanism, right, is 1% of like a commercial project or dictated by the commercial project themselves. But since this is an entity that's already part of Apache Junction, I understand there's a budget allocated for it, but I just want to make sure there's no conflict of interest of Parks versus Arts Commission, right? Because it's not as if it's not as if they're abdicating to the Arts Commission there.
No, there's no conflict. There's no legal conflict of any kind. You're going to see some opinions. But that's okay. That's why you're here.
I thought they wanted, I mean, the point was they wanted to work with us, so I don't see that there's a conflict per se, but like you said, there may be some opinions about things that come up. I have a question. Would any of us board members sit on that selection panel? Would any of us board members sit on that selection panel?
Two or three.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't know whether that would be conflict of interest. Yeah. And
It's not a conflict, however, if it's 3, well, if it's 4, yeah, now you got a quorum, and now you got a problem, because now everything's going to be public. If it's going to be 3, if it's, depends how it's picked, it could be determined to be a subcommittee of this commission, which is also covered under the open meeting law. So you got to be careful with that also. If it's a subcommittee, then you're going to have to do agendas. You'll have to have a secretary here. And I don't know if that's the intent of this. I don't think it is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's usually an
Yeah.
ad hoc committee. And
Right.
it meets one. I mean, it may meet more than once, but The committee is dedicated just to that project.
Right.
And then the next public art project is going to be a different committee. So at that point, you have other members of the Arts Commission sit on that panel.
So we'd probably be better off going with just two.
Yeah,
I would definitely not have 4 or 3.
Yeah.
So you could have 2 or 1, but you got to be careful, otherwise, and then you add the Park and Rec Commission, if some of those members are on, that's another problem for them. If they have the quorum or they have a subcommittee of the Park and Rec Department, you don't want that. And you
Right.
don't want to have a subcommittee of your board either.
Plus, if you're looking for input from the public and everybody, it's all filled with board members from, that
That's
are
right.
already on board, then we're not getting the feedback that we want
In
from
fact,
that group in the first place.
because it's such a small community, I would recommend you have no board members on there, and you pick from the public. That's what I would recommend, because you will be recommending everything to the council after you hear from this independent, well, not independent, but selected from your ranks.
We have the final decision, is what you're saying, basically,
You have a decision that you will recommend to city council, ultimately.
based
And
on
the
what
city
they.
council has the final say.
Final council has the final say, but you, if you create this ad hoc committee, whatever you want to call it, I would not make it members of this board. I don't think that's a good idea. I would not do that. I would have members from the public,
I see
Instead of
your
a
point.
Parks Board, you're saying.
or any members of any appointed boards.
So you wouldn't have anybody from this board on that group?
I would not recommend it. Maybe they do that in other cities, but
reason being, what's just conflict of interest or
you might get,
concern at, when it comes time to make the recommending?
yes, because then the person who said, well, I'm Jeff, I wanted this person. Well, now, do you got a conflict off because you kind of already made a recommendation to this board? Even though you were already on the ad hoc? How's that work? That's going to be a little squirrely.
Well, I could see where if we have a 7-member commission, that we would have still a voting block or a voting majority of the commission, where 2 members could excuse themselves if need be as being part of the selection committee. One of the challenges, I know that we only have 6 members at the moment, so that would mean we'd have potential for a 2-2 vote, I guess, if we had 2 members on a selection committee. But that kind of leads into another question about filling the role on the Public Arts Commission, to have that 7th person.
Diane,
Yeah.
in the cities that have had members of the Public Arts Commission on that selection group, why are they brought into it? What's the benefit of having them on there?
For the most part, the cities that I've worked with have had at least 1 member of the Arts Commission, and then that member of the Arts Commission comes back to, after the artist selection process, comes back to the Art Commission and said, just basically discussed, here's how the panel decided, here's why they decided. So the person who's on the Art Commission, who serves on the selection panel, becomes the voice of that panel and explains to the rest of the commission members.
The liaison between the two? then?
Yeah, they serve as a liaison. And in general, it's someone who has a background in the arts. For the most part, most people who are selected to be on an art commission has some background in the arts. It isn't always true. Sometimes you'll have a businessman who will want to be on an art commission. But for the most part, you have people who are versed in the arts sitting on an arts commission. Where I've worked, there hasn't been an issue with that. I don't know that we've had 2 members of the art commission sit on an art selection panel more than 1 member. Usually it's been 1 member. I'm trying to think of how City of Phoenix does it, Sacramento. I believe Sacramento and Las Vegas both had 1 member of the Art Commission sit on there and served as, like you said, a liaison. So it hasn't come back to be a problem. They fill out all the forms in terms of no conflict of interest. I don't know. I think it's something that Apache Junction should probably talk about and decide what they want to do.
Well, and, I mean, respectfully, I'd say that I think when we were approved by council to be members of the commission, it was with the intent that we have that arts background and perspective on public art that they would, that they value in terms of the recommendation. So to me, it would make sense to have representation on that selection committee, even if just as the liaison role. And like you said, they'd still do the same steps that everyone else on the committee did to excuse themselves. And then I guess the question would just be if, when it came time to make the recommendation, if it required them to abstain from a vote for any reason. And in our instance, maybe our 6 works in our favor in this case if we're still at that number by the time we end up making the selection, because then we'd have an odd number of voting members of the commission still.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think the selection of the vacancy will be in October. And then to fill the slot starting in November.
Okay.
So I don't know how quickly this process will go. Probably a lot slower than that.
Yeah.
So you'll be a full complement by November 1st or sometime in November.
Question, so once they have chosen what the selection that they want, and whoever, if we decide to have a board member or what, they bring it back to us, we still ultimately have a say, because what if they pick something that isn't really going to work, or they're
Yes.
really, again, it's our experience, what we've been putting into it all this time, our background that we know, that helps us make that final decision. So it might not go with the one that they select, but we have to back why, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have, that's one of the great things about having one member of the art commission on the selection panel, because they will be familiar with the process and what you all have been doing up to this time. What happens is the panel says, we would like to see John Jones as the artist for this project, and then that comes to you all to approve John Jones as the artist. And in general, if you've got a really good artist selection panel, it's not an issue. They will have done their due diligence. They've been going through all the slides. Staff, a member of staff or consultant will have to go back and do reference checks before the artist is selected. That's why we always have artist selected number 1 and then a backup, if for whatever reason. So, the panel will come to you and say, this is our number 1 choice, this is our number 2 choice, and even a number 3 choice. And then you are to approve it. And then the fact is that if you approve it as a body and it goes to city council, I don't know at what point the city council becomes involved in this. I don't know if they have to select. They may just want to be informed that this is the artist for this particular project. And then you have the artist is contracted and then comes up with a preliminary design, and that preliminary design comes to you all as well. You all get a say on what that design is. And also members of the public. By then, hopefully things will have opened up enough that you can have a public meeting, invite the artist, and go over preliminary concept, knowing that it's probably not the final concept. But you don't want to do, it's not a cafeteria. And that's one of the things that is hard to understand, because I see cities going through that process all the time, where they'll say, I like this element from this concept, I like this element from this concept, and that doesn't usually work. You may have concept A and concept B, and you pick one. But when the public gets involved, especially if they don't understand public art, they don't understand putting art in a public place, it's going to have all these restrictions tied to it. You don't ever want to do a poll, pick the artist. You don't ever want to do that. You'll get people from out of state weighing in on it. So it's if you've got a great artist selection panel, they bring the choice to you. You have a member of the commission on that panel. Then chances are you're going to be in agreement of who the artists are that were selected.
So again, and I was kind of thinking this through, but I'm just going to make that conclusion that having a board member from the Public Arts Commission on the panel also helps to guide the panel a bit by informing them about what we're doing, why or not something may or may not work, why we might need to look into it further, or any of those helps them guiding in their decision, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think by
Oh,
guiding,
influencing.
if you mean telling them a little bit about the site and the history of the town, then I think that's great. If you bring in an arts professional and you tell the arts professional, you know, our city doesn't want anything like this, the arts professional might bristle a little bit and just say, well, you know, let's try and think about this a little bit, but it's up to them, you know, to voice his or her opinion, and then it'll be a consensus. It may be a matter of, you have a scoring sheet in front of you and you score the artists, so, you know, then the higher ranking ones just rise to the top. And at that point, people decide, you know, and I've seen discussions go on for a while where you may be between two artists, and each person states their case as to why they believe that artist is the best, so, yeah.
Mr.
Right.
Chair, if I can.
Go ahead, Joel.
I do believe, though, when council set up this board, the intent was that you be a recommending board. So you do not get to pick the artist you recommend to the council. So I think that's the only clarification I'd make.
Yeah.
So you're,
Right.
Yeah.
the other committee, the ad hoc committee, they could recommend to you. You can go with them, you don't have to, but then you go to council and you state how you reached that you had an ad hoc committee come up with Mr. X or artist X, and you went with artist X, and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
And just okay, so now I'm really getting into the weeds here, but just so we understand, what's the process for creating the ad hoc committee itself? I'm assuming the first step is that we have that as an agenda item at some point. We dictate the terms of it, and then that is then filled in a subsequent meeting?
Well, actually, my experience has been that city staff comes up with the makeup of the artist selection panel.
Okay.
The city staff, it's usually their charge to do that, and they can come back and you know, as a member, you'll have one member of the Arts Commission. But for the most part, I haven't seen decisions made by arts commissioners as to who will be on that panel. Usually it's, you have an art professional, you can recommend, if you know arts professionals, then certainly recommend them to city staff and just say, I think this would be a good person to be on this board because X, Y, Z. I mean, you know, I think city staff always looks for people to serve on artist selection panels. In most cases, you'll have a public art administrator from another city sit on the panel, and one of the good things about that is looking at the artist's work and making sure it's not derivative of another project. It's something that's wholly original. It's something that's going to work in a public space. And if that artist is difficult, public art is a small world. I mean, you can say, you know, a certain artist who's done a $500,000 project, but that artist was so difficult to work with, nobody will ever want to work with that artist again. And suddenly that artist is on that, and you go, wow, I think I'd really want this artist to do this project. And then, you know, public art administrator is going to say, let me tell you about what this artist did, and the project worked, or the project fell apart, or he didn't know his materials well enough, but he keeps getting these big commissions. Or, you know, like there's an artist called Jaume Plensa from Spain, who we were discussing the fountain in Chicago with the people. Well, he was going to do a project in Sacramento, and it turned out to look exactly like a project he did in another city. You don't want to do that. You know, it's like, wow, somebody already paid you to do that. We don't need to do that again. And it was a very expensive project, so another artist was selected.
Double dipping.
All right. Well, I think that adds a lot of clarity to me on the makeup and the kind of process for, one, determining the members, and two, kind of the function of that selection committee. So I think what we'll look for in terms of proceeding with that for the dog park would just be that being enacted on the work plan then, because it sounds like it would be an action for city staff if the rest of the commission agrees, and so we would see that as part of the work plan.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, good, yeah. since we're not doing it, it needs to be accounted for and checklisted, so the work plan sounds like a good place to me.
Okay.
Does anybody disagree?
I think that tracks with the discussions we've been having so far,
Okay,
so.
great. And then there's one more item, number 4, which I don't think that you have. Okay.
No, the last item was the draft pamphlet for developers. Unfortunately, we weren't able to submit it in time, so we're going to review that at our next meeting.
Okay. And again, the intent of that pamphlet is just really awareness for developers
That's correct.
of any fee-generating project in the city, right?
That's right.
All right. Thank you very much, Diane. Okay, moving on in the agenda, so that covers old business. Just make sure I'm not missing anything here. So new business, we don't have any new business listed on the agenda. If there is new business, we can address it, or we can ask for it to be added to the agenda in the call for future agenda items. That moves us down past information reports and director's reports, no updates there. So into the call for future agenda items. I think for the next step in the work plan is a recurring old business, right? Do we have that on here as, update revisions to the work plan? So that's continuous on the agenda. And we'll anticipate seeing the addition of the selection panel there.
Real quick on that, should we probably have the request for qualifications set before a selection panel is set up? So that the
Agenda.
selection panel knows what the request for qualifications would be?
Is that our role?
Yes, yeah, we could do that. We could have it done before. Drafted before, yeah.
And I think that's part of what we'll look for in the work plan too, right? In that ongoing agenda item is, as it's developed, more of an action plan that lays out kind of step by step, right? So what would come, that way we're not making sure we're not putting the cart before the horse.
As we develop it this time, then we'll have it in place for future, you mean?
Template.
Right, and
Yeah.
we have a date set for the RFQ, I believe, for, was it 8/1 that I saw? For a draft RFQ?
That's
Yeah.
right, that's 8-1.
So, that should be in development, and we should be seeing a draft of that shortly. And that is specific to, I guess for clarification, that's specific to the dog park, right? Or is that a generic draft?
At this point, I think it's a generic draft. Knowing that we have the elements already here, and that you have a copy of another draft, it might be best to wait until we find out that budget has been secured. Because, we can do elements of it now, we can do eligibility, we can do, a map, but there's still a few things that I don't think have been settled. So, I could put together a draft RFQ, but it'll have some missing areas.
Perfect. Well, and that'll show where we need to fill in, right? It'll give us our knowns and our known unknowns.
Right.
All right. So I don't think any of that, it really qualifies as future agenda items. It falls kind of under work plan discussion. Future agenda item, I guess I'll open it up. Is there anything else under future agenda items that Hill would like to bring forward? Okay. One future agenda item I'd like to add, just because I know this is something that's going to take a significant amount of consideration and time, and I know is a subject that is both, it's a priority for both the city and the council, is just the roundabout. And so what I'd like to do is request a future agenda item where we can kind of discuss, what I'm hoping to do is provide some topics for thought or discussion on roundabout design, both historical, contextual, and regional. And so that's something I'd like to pull together for August meeting, just to put that at the forefront of people's minds, and not really anything actionable, but just to be a topic of discussion.
I see your point in that, because then once the dog park thing is done, then we can slide right into that a little quicker. If we're already looking at things that we think of for that area, which is really important.
Right.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I believe we need a motion to add that onto the agenda. Joel? His last item, do we need an agenda or a motion to add that on for next agenda, new business or old business?
Well, I think, I'm sorry. Yeah, that'd come under number 12. So yes.
Okay. So I guess to rephrase it, I'd ask for a motion to consider a future agenda item for discussion on the roundabout. And then
I will motion putting on the future agenda that we'll have a discussion about where we're going to go with the roundabout.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
And roll call?
Chair Byes,
Yes.
Commissioner Danford,
Yes.
Commissioner Ham,
Yes.
Commissioner Klett.
Yes,
So move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
there we go.
All right. Now we'll move on to selection of meeting dates, times, location, and purpose. Regular meeting proposed at 5:30 PM on August 9th, 2021. City Council chambers located at 300 East Superstition Boulevard.
I move that the Public Art Commission hold a regular meeting on August 9th, 2021 at 5:30 PM in the City Council chambers located at 300 East Superstition Boulevard.
Fantastic. I second that motion.
Thank you. Roll call?
Commissioner Danford,
Yes.
Commissioner Ham,
Yes.
Commissioner Klett.
Yes.
Chair Byes.
Yes.
So move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting of the Apache Junction Public Arts Commission at 6:21 PM on, what's today, July 12th?